Hi, it's Mike at DOT Compliance Help, and once again, another look at an NTSB report. Now, what I like to do is I like to talk about the root cause analysis, and 20 years ago, the NTSB would always tell you this is the root cause. Today, they're a little bit more wishy-washy about it, but they still give you a lot of information. And sometimes the NTSB wants to focus on a particular thing, and maybe that's not the most important thing for you to look at. Not that the NTSB is wrong, it's just that in many cases their audience is the DOT itself or various agencies within the DOT, and they're going to recommend something to them. And it's not that I disagree with them, but that's not what you can do as a trucking company. So this one is, I don't know. I try to pick out the most interesting ones. This incident has to do with a multi-vehicle crash in 2021. As you can see here, it took 2 years for them to complete their investigation and publish their report. But what happened was there was some rain and below freezing temperatures in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. I'm just gonna lay it out up front. As a motor carrier, if you're in Kansas or Virginia or California or New Mexico, I don't care where you are, if you're sending a truck and they're going to go through northern Illinois and you hear that the temperature is going to be below zero in northern Illinois, maybe you don't care too much about that. Maybe it's okay to say, well, people in northern Illinois know how to clear the road, snow and ice. So we just won't worry too much about it. And that might be perfectly legitimate. But here's my theory. If you're dispatching a truck that's going through Dallas, Fort Worth, or going from Houston to Midland, or just almost anywhere in Texas, and you hear that the temperature is going to be below freezing, maybe you should take a whole different approach, like maybe just either don't send them or just have them pull over until the temperature comes back up, because it doesn't get that cold in Texas that often, and therefore, the people that clear the roads don't have as much experience, and you don't have as well developed of infrastructure. And B, the regular people that are driving automobiles have less skills because they're less accustomed to driving on snow and ice. That's just kind of the bottom line theory that I got out of this. But here's the story about what happened: 36 hours below freezing, etc. About 130 vehicles involved in the pileup. Here's the sequence of events. First this happened, then this, etc. Here's a couple of pictures of the pileup, just to give you an idea what it looks like when there's 100 cars involved in a big crash. The official statement from the NTSB. The probable cause was the ice accumulation on the surface, which caused drivers to lose control of their vehicles. Okay, it's the weather. There's nothing we can do about the weather. Contributing to this is failure on the part of the DOT, the state DOT now, to effectively monitor and address roadway conditions. Okay, again, it's the DOT, nothing you can do about that part. The third part, contributing to unsafe roadway conditions, drivers are driving too fast. The people in the cars, and trucks too, I suppose, I always assume that the commercial vehicle operator is much more of a practiced professional driver and makes fewer mistakes, and I think that's generally accurate. But drivers in general were driving too fast for the conditions, and that's obviously something that happens a lot. So what can you do? If that's the bottom line, people were driving like dum-dums. Make sure you've got some policies and procedures, and you've got some driver training. And if it's about speed selections, you have a lot of tools available to you. For instance, if you got one guy that speeds more often than everybody else, maybe you could set the speed limit on his truck. Those are tools that are available to you. Bottom line up front, 6 people died in this big crash. Bad decisions made by a huge number of people. They underestimated the danger. They thought the toll road was going to be safe. The key thing I want you to practice looking for anytime you look at an accident report or you read an NTSB report that comes out a couple of years later: could this happen to us? And I'm assuming that there's some percentage, whether it's 1% or 90%, it could happen to us. So what can you do to make it less likely that that's going to happen? Or in the case of this incident in Texas, where 100 cars piled up on freezing rain, what can you do just to avoid being in it? And again, my theory is just be darn careful and plan ahead and try not to get caught in the ice storm in Texas because they don't know how to handle it. Here's another picture just to show you what the road conditions look like. One of the hardest things about freezing rain is it doesn't necessarily look dangerous, and it's kind of invisible because at one moment the road's wet and your tires are made in such a way that they find their way through that little uh, thin layer of water and they get traction because that's what they're made to do. Unless you're going too fast or don't have the right kind of tires, in which case you might hydroplane. But the instant that little glaze of water turns to ice, it's invisible. That's why in Missouri, I know they used to refer to it as black ice. I don't know if everybody calls it that, but it's hard to anticipate, except that when you know the temperature is below zero, human factor analysis, the NTSB usually spends a huge amount of time and paperwork looking at, everything about the drivers. And typically, they focus on the commercial vehicle operators. But, has he had enough sleep? Was he on drugs? Was he distracted? Has he had any training? Things of that nature. But in this particular case, they're not really getting into that because it was a 100-car pileup, and they just assumed that hardly anybody has any professional training at all. Here's the numbers to back up my comment that I made a while ago about how it temperature drops below freezing in northern Illinois much more frequently than it does in Texas. And I say northern Illinois because that's where I live. You could say the same thing about Wisconsin or Minnesota or even Canada. They have more practice dealing with snow and ice. The NTSB's recommendations are kind of interesting here. First, the new ones. The NTSB is calling for a statewide plan for environmental sensor stations. And you know what? That doesn't sound like a bad idea to me. If I'm a taxpayer and I live in Texas, maybe that's one of the things that I wouldn't mind the government spending some money on. But that's not really how it works. It's probably fuel tax money, which is initially remitted to the state or the federal government and then sent back by the federal government to the state in many cases. So the state's got some money to spend on the roads. Maybe they should spend some of it on environmental sensors so they'll have a better idea when and where the temperature drops below freezing. Okay, a comprehensive winter weather training program, and this is mostly, the fire drill for the tollway workers or the highway maintenance workers. Enact legislation, and this is interesting, to allow the Texas DOT to install variable speed limit signs. I think in Ohio they have these. So instead of having a speed limit sign that's a big piece of metal that's painted white with black letters an inch tall, you got a TV screen, or well, not exactly a TV screen, but an LED screen where the speed limit can change. Again, it might be a good idea, but that's not the kind of thing you can react directly to. Now, they reiterated some recommendations. Number one, they want the DOT to develop a standard for connected vehicle technology. Number two, they want the NHTSA to work on this performance standards and to mandate it. And they want the FCC to implement the appropriate safeguards. What they're talking about here is something that used to be referred to as vehicle-to-vehicle communication. The theory is, and it's a good theory, if every single vehicle on the road is constantly communicating with every other vehicle on the road, the instant that the truck or car in front of you hits his brakes, your car is going to sense it, or truck, and apply the brakes also. Now, that's not going to prevent a 100-car pileup, but if that works, it could prevent and probably would prevent a lot of pileups, a lot of wrecks, a lot of rear-end collisions. The NTSB has been calling for this for at least 16 years that I'm aware of, but the last time I checked, the technology to implement it is not available, and the cost involved is going to be tremendous. So, I mean, it seems like a good idea, and I think it'll happen eventually, but I'm hoping that there's smaller laboratories where people are experimenting with, 50 or 100 cars or trucks for months and years and working out the bugs before they mandate it. Sometimes the federal government mandates something and the technology is immature and we're just throwing tens of millions of dollars down rat holes. And the last comment here was um, they want um, they want the state and local governments to be able to monitor people's speeds. And this is something really interesting that I think most people are not aware of. In theory, you could set up some kind of a movie camera at point A, let's say 5 miles inside the state line, and you've got some interstate highway that goes from one end of the state to the other, and then let's say 160 miles later, just before a car or truck exits the state, traveling on this interstate highway, if it should have taken him 10 or 11 hours to get from point A to point B, driving the speed limit, and it only takes him 6 or 7 hours, well, that means he's driving on average more than 15 miles over the speed limit. Maybe you should be able to send the trucking company a ticket in the mail for doing that. It's against the law. That's the part that nobody knows about. It's against the law. No state can do that. So I believe the NTSB is recommending the state of Texas. Maybe we should allow that. Those are all the comments I have about that incident. But again, as always, I don't propose to say I have the absolute answer and this is what you should do, or this is what you should believe, or this is what you should learn from this incident. But my theory about this particular one is, if you're dispatching trucks that are going through Texas, when the weather is going to be below freezing, consider the possibility of rerouting the truck or maybe holding it up or just tell them to stop. But anyway, the most important thing is I think it's really valuable to read NTSB reports and conduct your own root cause analysis just as you would if it was a collision that your vehicle has already been involved in. Have a great day and be safe out there.